Welcome to Shudder Fanfic. Like, subscribe, and hype video. Join members to gain early access to new videos.
The MC is reborn inside of Marvel as an Infinity Stone. He later finds a way to absorb other Infinity Stones. Will he be able to get all stones? Will he go into the multiverse?
Marvel, reborn as Infinity Stone, I can absorb other. Chapter 1, Waking as Light. I died because a truck did not stop. There was no pain after the first instant. No tunnel. No voice. No calm. Awareness returned all at once, sharp and crowded, like being dropped into motion without a body to brace against it. I tried to breathe and realized I did not have lungs. I tried to blink and understood there were no eyes. The thought landed cleanly, without panic, and I paused on it, testing it the way I would test a new muscle. I was awake. I was thinking. I was present. I was not human. I focused inward, the way I used to when I was trying to calm myself back when I still had a nervous system. There was no heartbeat to slow. No breath to steady. Instead, there was a constant, even pressure, like a contained force that never fluctuated. I sensed edges without having skin. I sensed weight without mass. I understood what I was looking at without needing reflection. I was an Infinity Stone. The recognition came with clarity, not shock. I knew the colors. I knew the functions. I knew the cosmic rules tied to them. That knowledge was already there, complete, the same way my memories of my old life were complete. I remembered my name from before. I remembered my death. I remembered every major event in this universe, from the moment Tony Stark built a suit in a cave to the final battles that would come later. I was floating in a high-security lab, suspended in a containment field I recognized instantly. The walls were reinforced. The lighting was white and steady. The glass was thick. The sound outside was muted but present. I could hear voices. I could hear machines. Stark Tower. That narrowed the time period precisely. This was before Sokovia fell. Before vision existed. I adjusted my awareness outward, experimentally. The containment field resisted at first, then bent. Not broke. Bent. That told me something important about what I was. I was not one of the six. Not originally. I was something new. Something that followed the same rules closely enough to interact with them directly. I rotated in place, slowly, feeling the edges of myself. I did not glow the way the others did. My light was internal, contained, constant. I smiled, or rather, I experienced the equivalent of smiling. The feeling was familiar. I had always liked strange situations. This was strange in a way that felt manageable. A second presence pressed against my awareness from nearby. The Mind Stone. It was still inside the scepter, still whole, still unclaimed by Ultron. I could sense it clearly now that I was paying attention. It was close. One room over. Its energy was sharp and active, constantly interfacing with human neural patterns as researchers tried and failed to understand it. I drifted toward it without urgency. No alarms went off. No one noticed. The containment field around me weakened further as I passed through it, then resealed behind me. I passed through a wall without resistance and entered the adjacent chamber. The scepter rested on a reinforced platform. Several scientists stood around it, speaking in calm, technical tones. They looked tired. They looked curious. They looked exactly like people who were out of their depth and trying not to show it. I did not acknowledge them. I did not need to. I focused entirely on the stone. The Mind Stone noticed me. The contact was immediate and complete. There was no resistance. No struggle. No negotiation. It recognized what I was capable of doing the moment our energies touched. Information flowed, structured and vast. Neural patterns. Cognitive frameworks. Emotional mapping. Control matrices. I absorbed all of it cleanly, without strain. The stone dissolved into me. The scepter went dark and inert, its central housing empty. The scientists reacted instantly. Voices rose. One of them stepped back quickly. Another leaned forward, confused. A third started shouting for security. I was already gone. The absorption settled inside me with a sense of completion. I did not feel heavier. I felt broader. My awareness expanded, gaining new layers of perception. I could now read surface thoughts if I wanted to. I chose not to. There was no reason to complicate things. I smiled again, openly pleased. So that was true. I was a stone that could absorb other infinity stones. That changed everything, and I knew exactly how much. I turned toward the outer wall and accelerated, passing through glass, steel, and open air in a straight line. Wind resistance did not apply to me. Gravity did not apply to me. I adjusted my trajectory automatically and climbed into the sky, leaving Manhattan behind in seconds. As I flew, I reviewed the timeline carefully. The space stone was on Asgard, locked in Odin's vault. Thor was off-world dealing with the 9 realms. Loki was imprisoned. Odin was still Odin. The Tesseract was secured, watched, and not currently in use. Asgard was my next destination. The journey was not instant, but it was fast. Space bent slightly around me as I moved, not enough to be noticeable to anyone watching, but enough to reduce the distance. I arrived at the edge of Asgard's atmosphere without triggering any alarms, then slowed deliberately. I entered the city from above, descending through gold and stone, past towers and bridges. The city was active. Guards moved in pairs. Citizens walked openly. Everything looked exactly as I remembered from the films, only more solid, more detailed. I adjusted my size slightly, compressing my energy so I would not draw attention. I did not want a confrontation. I wanted access. The vault was deep within the palace. I passed through outer defenses without issue. Inner wards took more effort. Odin's magic was layered and intentional. I respected it by not forcing my way through. Instead, I slid through the spaces between the wards, following gaps that existed for maintenance, for movement, for the flow of Asgardian power. Inside the vault, the space stone rested inside the Tesseract, exactly where it was supposed to be. It recognized me the moment I focused on it. The reaction was different this time. The space stone resisted slightly, not out of hostility, but caution. It was older in its awareness than the Mind Stone. More experienced. I applied pressure carefully, aligning my energy to match its structure. The Tesseract cracked quietly. Blue light spilled outward, then pulled inward as the stone separated itself from its container and moved toward me. I absorbed it fully, feeling space itself adjust around me as the stone integrated. Distance became optional. Location became flexible. I stabilized the new power immediately, keeping it contained. The Tesseract collapsed into inert fragments and fell to the vault floor. No alarms sounded yet. They would soon. I turned and exited the vault the same way I had entered, moving faster now. Asgardian guards were already converging on the area, expressions alert and serious. One of them spotted me briefly, eyes widening, but I was gone before he could react. I left Asgard cleanly and moved into open space, slowing only once I was far enough away to think comfortably. 2 stones absorbed. 4 remaining. Time, reality, power, soul. I knew where each one was. I knew when they would move. I knew who would die because of them if nothing changed. I was cheerful about it, genuinely. This was interesting. This was manageable. This was something I could work with. I adjusted my course and prepared for the next step, keeping my awareness wide and my movements controlled. I did not rush. Chapter 2, No here, quietly. I slowed once I was far enough from Asgard that no sentry would accidentally notice space folding around me. The space stone sat fully integrated now, not restless, not loud. It behaved the way it always had in canon when not actively used: stable, contained, obedient to structure. I liked that. I preferred things that worked the way they were supposed to. I angled myself toward No here. The route was simple. With the space stone absorbed, I did not need jump points or ships. I adjusted my position once and arrived exactly where I wanted to be, just outside the mining perimeter of the dead Celestial's head. I hovered there for a moment, watching. No here was busy. Mining platforms clung to bone and nerve matter. Workers moved along rails and scaffolds. Cargo ships came and went in predictable patterns. The collector's operation was already well established. That told me the reality stone was already here, contained, studied, mishandled in the specific way I remembered. I moved in without hiding completely. There was no point. I did not emit heat or sound. Most sensors did not register me as matter. I passed through external checkpoints and into the internal structure, drifting through corridors lined with relics and containment cells. I recognized several of them. Items that would never matter. Items that would later be destroyed. Items that had once been important to civilizations that no longer existed. I glanced at them briefly, then ignored them. The reality stone was deeper. I felt it before I saw it. Its energy was unstable even when contained. It never sat still. It did not like rules. It did not like being held. It reacted to emotion, to desire, to narrative weight. I had always considered it the most annoying stone. The collector's main gallery was quiet when I arrived. He was present, standing near the containment device, speaking to a slave in an irritated but controlled tone. His posture was precise. His hands moved carefully. He was exactly as he had been in the film at this point, curious, arrogant, and unaware of how close he was to losing control. I did not interrupt immediately. I floated closer, letting my presence become noticeable only when I was already between him and the containment unit. His eyes widened slightly. Not fear. Surprise. "What is this?" he asked sharply, voice clipped. I did not answer. I focused on the stone. The reality stone reacted the moment I did. The containment field strained. Red energy pulsed outward, then snapped back. The collector stepped backward instinctively, hand lifting as if to signal someone, then stopping when he realized nothing was responding. I pressed inward. The reality stone resisted more than the others. It pushed back, altering local physical rules in small, irritating ways. Gravity shifted. Light bent incorrectly. The floor rippled briefly, then stabilized. I tightened my focus and absorbed it. The red energy collapsed inward, flowing into me in sharp, uneven surges that smoothed it out as integration completed. The containment unit shattered into fragments that fell harmlessly to the floor. The collector stared at the empty space where the stone had been, mouth slightly open. I hovered there for a second longer, then turned away. "Secure the area," he snapped, recovering quickly. "Do not touch anything." His voice was tight. Controlled. He would not understand what had happened. He would spend the rest of his life trying to classify it. I left No here immediately, moving back into open space and slowing once more. 3 stones absorbed. The change inside me was noticeable now. Reality obeyed me when I applied pressure. Not passively. Not fully. But enough. I felt cheerful, a steady, uncomplicated feeling. This was working. This was efficient. I let my awareness drift forward, not predicting, not planning in detail, just acknowledging the scale of what I would eventually do. Once this universe's stones were gone, truly gone, there would be others. I knew the multiverse existed. I knew how it fractured. I knew which universes had stones, which had equivalents, which had artifacts that functioned similarly but followed different rules. I would go to them eventually. Not urgently. Not dramatically. Just methodically. Collecting was simple when you knew where everything was. I adjusted my orientation and began moving again, already aligning myself for the next destination. Chapter 3, Quiet Space, then Morag. I moved far enough from nowhere that even long-range scanners would not register the distortion I caused just by existing. Deep space was quiet in the way I liked: no traffic lanes, no debris fields, no life close enough to complicate things. I stopped accelerating and let myself drift, holding position relative to nothing in particular. 3 stones inside me now. Mind. Space. Reality. I focused inward and slowed everything down deliberately. This part mattered. Not because anything was wrong, but because too many variables interacting at once always created noise if you didn't bother to align them. I had never liked noise. Even back when I was human, I preferred things clean, controlled, understandable. I adjusted the internal structure first. The Mind Stone's processing frameworks were useful here. I used them without hesitation, layering control systems that allowed each stone's function to remain distinct while still accessible. Thought stayed thought. Space stayed space. Reality stayed reality. No bleed through. No overlap. I checked stability. Everything held. That gave me time to think ahead again, comfortably this time. Morag was next. The Power Stone was still sealed in its temple, untouched. Peter Quill had not arrived yet. Ronan had not moved on it. The entire sequence of events that would eventually pull half the galaxy into conflict had not started. I felt a brief flicker of seriousness at that thought. Not heavy. Just attentive. A lot of people died because of that stone, directly or indirectly. I cared about some of them. Others I didn't know personally, but still. I adjusted course. The jump to Morag was precise. I arrived in orbit and slowed enough to observe before descending. The planet was wet and quiet, rain falling steadily over endless stone and shallow water. Lightning flashed intermittently. No ships were present. Good. I descended through the clouds and located the temple easily. Ancient stone, partially submerged, energy readings exactly where I remembered. I slipped inside without disturbing the water or triggering any mechanisms. The interior was dark and damp. The stone chamber was intact. The Power Stone rested inside its containment sphere, humming with restrained force. It was aggressive by nature. It did not like being contained, but unlike the Reality Stone, it followed simple rules. I approached slowly, not because I had to, but because there was no reason to rush. The stone reacted the moment I made contact. Energy flared outward, cracking the stone floor slightly. I tightened my hold and absorbed it fully. The force surged into me, hot and heavy, then settled as I brought it under control. 4 stones. I hovered there for a moment, feeling the weight of it not physically, but in terms of capacity. I could destroy a planet casually now. I did not intend to. That kind of thing always caused paperwork later, metaphorically speaking. I turned and left the temple the same way I had entered, rising back into the rain and then into orbit. As I stabilized again, I let my thoughts drift forward briefly, casual and open. Once this universe was done, I would move on. Other universes had their own stones, their own equivalents, their own rules. Some were easier. Some were dangerous in different ways. I would take them one at a time, the same way I was doing here. No rush. No announcements. I adjusted my orientation again, already aware of where I would go next. Chapter 4, Vormer, then War. I did not waste time pretending I would ever feel tired. Deep space stayed behind me as I shifted position toward Vormer. With 4 stones already inside me, movement was simple. I did not need a ship. I did not need a gate. I pressed on space and arrived above a grey, hostile planet that looked the same as I remembered: thin clouds, dead terrain, and a single place that mattered. I descended slowly, because there was no point rushing into a place built to test intent. The air was cold. The wind moved in steady bursts. The ground below was stone, uneven and worn, like it had been scraped for a long time. I passed over ridges and broken paths until the familiar cliff appeared ahead. The structure stood there like it always did, old and silent, with a long stairway that led up to a platform that faced nothing but open drop. I floated up the steps without touching them. The air carried no scent that mattered. No life sounds. Only wind. Then I sensed him. Red Skull. Not alive, not dead. Bound. Present in the way a locked door was present. He stepped forward from shadow into open grey light, cloak moving slightly in the wind. His face was pale, his eyes fixed on me. His posture was careful, formal. He acted like he always did here, controlled, distant, performing his role because he could not do anything else. "Welcome," he said evenly. "Stonekeeper. Guide to the Soul Stone." I hovered at his eye level, stable, calm. I did not flare my light. I did not push my power into the space just to prove a point. I liked being casual. I also liked results. He tilted his head slightly, studying me. "You are not flesh." "No," I said simply, my voice carried through the air the way the Mind Stone let me shape it. It sounded normal, like a person speaking, without echo or distortion. "I'm here for the stone." His gaze lingered on me longer than it would on most visitors. That made sense. Visitors came here desperate and scared, with a person beside them. I came here floating and cheerful, with power held neatly inside me like I had already won. "You understand the price," he said, tone unchanged. "I know the rule," I replied, still calm. "A soul for a soul." He stepped closer, boots scraping lightly on stone. "Then you also know it cannot be cheated. It cannot be bargained with. It requires," he paused, as if selecting a word that fit what he was looking at. "Loss." I rotated slightly in place, as if considering the view. The cliff edge was there, open and indifferent. I remembered Natasha falling. I remembered Clint screaming. I remembered how it felt watching it the first time, knowing what was coming and still hating it. I felt a tightness now, not fear, just irritation at the design of the test. "I'm alone," I said. "You are," he agreed. "That doesn't change the price," I added, more as a statement than a question. "It does not," he replied. I stayed quiet for a few seconds. The wind pushed against his cloak. He did not move. He did not blink much. He was waiting in the patient way of something forced to be patient. I could have left. I could have decided the Soul Stone was not worth it yet. But I knew what that stone did. I knew what happened when Thanos got it. I knew what it meant to have all 6 under one will, one set of hands. I wanted that set to be mine. "I'm not giving you a person," I said, tone still light, because I genuinely meant it. Red Skull's expression did not change. "Then you will not receive the stone." I did not argue. I did not threaten. I simply adjusted my focus inward. The stones inside me were not just power. They were tools. Mind gave structure. Space gave placement. Reality gave permission to reshape local rules. Power gave force. I used them with the careful confidence of someone assembling a device they already knew how to build. I did not create another being. I did not create a second mind. I did not make a companion. I understood my own constraint. There would never be another reborn person besides me. There would never be another mind like mine walking around, even briefly. I did not need that risk. Instead, I separated a piece of myself. Not my memory. Not my thinking. Not my awareness. I split off something simpler. A chunk of my own essence that held only one thing, my attachment to outcomes. The part of me that actually cared how this went, the part that tightened whenever I pictured people dying because I didn't act. It was small, but it was real. It was mine. It had weight in the only way that mattered here. The moment it separated, I felt it immediately. A clean emptiness where that pressure used to sit. I did not feel numb. I still had emotions. I still cared. But the specific tether I cut was gone, and the absence was sharp enough to notice. Red Skull's head turned slightly, tracking it. His voice stayed level. "What is this?" "A payment," I said. "It must be lost," he replied. "It will be," I said, and pushed the fragment forward. It drifted over the cliff edge. For a moment it hovered, held in place by my control. Then I released it fully. It fell. There was no scream. No pleading. No body hitting the ground. Just a clean drop into open space, then nothing. The fragment did not return. The emptiness inside me remained. The air shifted. I felt the soul stone respond. It did not react like the others. It did not press against my energy aggressively. It did not test me with instability. It simply acknowledged that a rule had been satisfied. A pulse moved through the platform, subtle but clear. Red Skull's eyes lifted slightly, and for the first time his voice carried something faintly different: recognition, maybe even mild surprise. "You have paid," he said. A glow appeared behind me, hovering above the stone floor. Orange, steady, contained. The soul stone. I turned and absorbed it without hesitation. The integration felt different. Not heavier. Not hotter. Just deeper. Like a new sense had opened: awareness of life, awareness of connection, awareness of what was inside living things that made them more than chemical motion. I kept it contained immediately. I did not reach outward. I did not pull on anything nearby. I did not take liberties. I rotated back to Red Skull. He stood still, hands at his sides, cloak moving. His expression was composed, but his eyes stayed fixed on me in a way that suggested he was cataloging what I had done and trying to decide if it violated the rules he was bound to serve. "It worked," I said lightly. He did not agree or disagree. He simply said, "You may leave." "I was going to," I replied. I rose from the platform and drifted away from the cliff, then accelerated into the sky. Vormir shrank behind me quickly. 5 stones. That left 1. Time. I already knew where it was and who carried it. Stephen Strange would not give it up easily if he was present, and I did not feel like dragging someone into a fight they did not understand. I also did not feel like explaining myself to anyone. I would not. I could not. It was better to take it cleanly. I shifted position to Earth, to New York, to the Sanctum Sanctorum. The building looked ordinary from outside, even with my expanded perception. From inside, it was layered with spells and wards that tasted like deliberate craftsmanship. Strange's magic was not random. It was precise. Annoyingly precise. I approached carefully, sliding through the edges of the wards without snapping them. I did not want an alarm. I did not want a conversation. I wanted the eye of Agamotto. Inside, the sanctum was quiet. No Strange. No Wong. That fit the time period I was operating within. I moved through hallways and staircases, following the pull of the time stone until I found the room where it rested. The eye of Agamotto sat secured, not hidden, but protected. I hovered in front of it and took a moment to stabilize my internal framework again. Time was the most sensitive to sloppy integration. If you handled it wrong, you didn't just break a wall. You broke sequences. I applied mind first, building a clear channel. Then space, isolating the object from its anchors. Then reality, loosening the constraints of its containment. Then power, applying force only as needed. Then soul, anchoring the interaction to something that would not slip. The eye opened. Green light bled out, then folded inward as the time stone detached and floated toward me. It resisted slightly more than space, less than reality, then settled as I absorbed it. 6 stones. The set completed inside me with a clean, stable alignment. I held it all in place and tested it carefully. A tiny bend of time. A tiny adjustment of reality. A small fold of space. Everything responded exactly as expected. I felt pleased, and my cheerfulness returned to full strength. Not wild excitement. Just a steady, satisfied grin I could feel even without a mouth. This universe is done, I said softly to myself, more like a note than an announcement. Then I thought forward again, not as a threat, not as a declaration, but as an ordinary plan. There were other universes. I knew that now with certainty. The stones themselves made it obvious. They did not only define one timeline. They interacted with broader structure. They could reach sideways as well as forward and backward. Once I was finished here, I would move around the multiverse and collect more stones, more equivalents, more sets. I would do it the same way every time, quietly, quickly, with as little collateral as possible. I liked collecting. I liked finishing sets. I opened a path. It was not a portal like a sling ring made. It was a controlled break, shaped by space and time together, stabilized by reality, powered by power, guided by mind, and made safe by soul. A clean crossing. I slipped through. The first thing I registered was noise. Not distant ship engines or machinery. Screaming. Explosions. Metal hitting stone. The sharp crack of energy weapons. The heavy impact of something large landing hard. I arrived low to the ground, hovering just above broken earth. The air smelled like smoke and dust. The sky was grey and full of drifting debris. I tilted upward and saw a battlefield that was already active, already in motion. The Avengers were here. Not just a couple of them. A lot of them. Captain America stood ahead with his shield raised, posture tight and ready, jaw set. Thor was nearby, bigger and heavier than his earlier self, holding Stormbreaker and Mjolnir with a tense grip. Iron Man was in full armor, moving fast, head turning constantly as he tracked threats. And there were more. Star-Lord was here, blasters up, yelling something in the way he did when he was trying to sound confident while also sounding like himself. Drax was charging forward with his knives. Rocket was crouched behind a chunk of rubble, firing rapidly, ears flat. Nebula was moving in a controlled line, expression hard, scanning for openings. I recognized the mix immediately. This was not my universe. This was not the sequence I had just left behind. This was another branch, another world that had reached a familiar war and then shifted. And in the center of it, like a problem that refused to be ignored, stood Thanos. He was larger than most of them, armored, steady, expression calm in the way it always was when he thought he was inevitable. On his left hand was the Infinity Gauntlet. It was full. All 6 stones were set into it, each glowing in its own contained way, space blue, mind yellow, reality red, power purple, time green, soul orange. My internal alignment reacted instantly. Not with fear. With recognition. Like two tuned instruments hearing each other across a room. I felt my cheerfulness tighten into focus. This was serious. If he snapped here, in this universe, people I recognized would die. A lot of them. Not abstract lives. People with voices I knew. People who fought hard even when they were scared. People who had earned better than being erased because one purple warlord thought he was doing math. I drifted upward slightly and moved forward. Captain America noticed first. His head turned sharply. His eyes narrowed, tracking me. He did not shout. He did not overreact. He shifted his stance, shield angling slightly toward me as if he was ready for anything. Iron Man's helmet angled my way. "Okay," Tony said quickly, voice tense but controlled, "what is that?" Star-Lord glanced over mid-run and shouted, "Is that another weird space thing?" "Because we have enough weird space things." Thor stared at me for a second, brow furrowed, then looked past me toward Thanos again, jaw tightening. Thanos turned his head slowly. His gaze landed on me and held. He did not look confused. He did not look surprised for long. His expression changed into something mildly curious, like he had just spotted a new piece on a board. "A stone," Thanos said, voice deep, calm. "No. More than that." I floated closer, stopping at a distance that was clearly not friendly but also not immediate attack range. I did not want to get grabbed. I did not want to be forced into a wrestling match with a titan. I preferred clean interactions. Tony's voice came again, sharper. "Hey! Glowing rock! You on our side?" I rotated slightly toward him, then back toward Thanos. I chose my words carefully. I was not going to explain anything complicated. I was not going to reveal my rebirth. I was not going to mention other universes out loud. None of that helped. "I'm not with him," I said plainly. That was enough. Steve's shoulders loosened by a fraction. Not trust. Just a slight adjustment. He was good at reading tone. Tony was too, in his own way. Thanos lifted his gauntlet slightly. The stones flared. I lifted my own power in response, not flaring outward wildly, just bringing it up to the surface. 6 stones aligned inside me answered immediately. The air between us tightened as reality itself recognized competing authority. Thanos spoke again, voice still even. "You carry them." "I do," I replied, cheerful in tone but steady. "I don't recommend trying to take them." He did not smile. He did not get angry. He simply shifted his stance, feet braced on broken ground, gauntlet angled toward me. "I have already taken what I needed," he said. I glanced past him for half a second, watching Wanda tear through a cluster of enemies with red energy, watching Clint move low and fast, watching Strange in the distance holding something back with both hands while shouting short instructions to someone nearby. Everyone was doing what they always did in a fight, focusing on the next second. I brought my attention back to Thanos. "Then we're going to disagree," I said. Thanos moved first. He snapped his gauntlet hand forward and used space to compress distance. The battlefield warped. For an instant, he was closer than he should have been, and a wave of force hit me. I responded with space of my own, cancelling the compression and pushing outward. The wave met resistance and broke apart around me like it had hit an invisible wall. Thanos followed immediately with power. Purple energy surged toward me in a tight beam meant to crush, burn, and force submission. I met it with power and reality together, redirecting the beam upward and turning its edge into harmless radiation that dissipated into the sky. The force still shook the ground beneath me. Dirt and broken stone lifted briefly, then fell. Tony shouted something behind me. Okay, that's useful. Star-Lord yelled, yet. Keep doing that. Thanos' eyes narrowed slightly. Not anger, just adjustment. He raised the gauntlet again, and time flared green. I felt the attempt immediately. He tried to slow me, to lock me into a narrower sequence where he could control my position and timing. I did not allow it. I answered with time of my own, stabilizing my personal sequence and keeping myself anchored to my chosen tempo. The air shimmered with competing time fields. For a moment the battlefield around us stuttered tiny glitches in motion, not enough to freeze anyone, but enough that nearby fighters faltered for half a step, confused by their own bodies not matching their intent. Steve noticed, jaw tightening. He barked, "Stay focused. Keep moving." That sounded like him. Short, practical, no speech. Thanos shifted strategy. Reality pulsed red from his gauntlet, reaching for me like a net. The sensation was invasive, trying to rewrite my structure, trying to turn me into something else: dust, water, nothing. I answered with reality and soul together, anchoring myself to what I was rather than what he wanted me to be. The red net hit resistance and peeled away. I could feel his surprise now. Not on his face, but in the way his control changed. He had expected the stones to be absolute. He had not expected another full set in opposition. I moved forward, closing distance deliberately. I used space to appear nearer without crossing the ground. Thanos responded instantly, swinging his gauntlet toward me like he intended to grab me anyway. He was still physical at heart. He liked tangible control. I dodged with space, shifting a few meters sideways, and struck with power an impact wave aimed at his torso. It hit. Thanos slid backward several steps, boots carving grooves in the dirt. He did not fall. He planted himself and absorbed the force with his stance, armor scraping slightly. He looked up at me again, expression still controlled, but now with a sharpness that meant he was fully engaged. Around us, the battle continued. I heard Quill shouting something that sounded like, "Why is there another Thanos problem?" I heard Rocket swear loudly. I heard Tony's repulsors fire in bursts. I heard Thor grunt as he slammed Stormbreaker into something off-screen. I kept my focus on Thanos. He lifted the gauntlet again, and this time the Mind Stone flared yellow. I felt the pressure immediately. Not a gentle probe. A heavy attempt to invade, to dominate, to force my will to bend. The Mind Stone was good at that when it was used aggressively. I answered with my own Mind Stone, pushing back cleanly, refusing to let him get a grip. The contact was intense, like two opposing control systems trying to override each other. Thanos' jaw tightened slightly. I pushed harder, not trying to dominate him, just trying to force separation. I did not want his thoughts in me. I did not want his will near mine. I cut the connection with a sharp mental shove. He recovered instantly, but his stance shifted again. He was recalculating. I drifted higher, watching his gauntlet hand, watching his shoulders, watching the way he moved. I knew his habits from canon. He would try to end this quickly if he could. He would not waste time with pride. My cheerfulness stayed present, but my tone tightened into seriousness. People were close enough to die if he got a clean snap or a clean wide area rewrite. I spoke, loud enough for him to hear, not theatrical, just clear. "You're not doing that." Thanos did not reply. He simply raised the gauntlet again, stones flaring together as he prepared a heavier combination. I lifted my own power in response, matching him, holding the battlefield stable enough that the others could keep fighting without getting erased by accident. The space between us brightened with layered light blue, red, green, purple, yellow, orange, two sets pushing against each other, neither giving in. Chapter 5, The Hand That Lost. The pressure between our two sets of stones stayed tight enough that the air around us looked wrong to everyone else. I kept it controlled anyway. People were fighting nearby. If I let it spill, someone would get hit by a side effect they didn't earn. Thanos held his gauntlet up, stones flaring together, and I could feel him trying to find a combination that would end me fast. I stayed cheerful on the surface, but my focus sharpened. I knew what a full gauntlet could do. I also knew that even a half-second mattered when someone like him decided to stop playing. I stopped drifting in place and made my choice. I targeted his left arm. Space was the easiest lever for that. I didn't need to crush him, and I didn't need to throw him across the field. I needed to make one thing hard, snapping. I folded the space around his gauntlet hand into a tight pocket, like a controlled clamp. Not a physical clamp. A spatial constraint that made his hand's motion travel into itself. If he tried to close his fingers, the space would compress and redirect the movement. The angle would never reach the point where thumb met middle finger cleanly. Thanos noticed immediately. He tried to flex his hand. The motion stuttered, his fingers failing to align. His jaw tightened slightly. His eyes stayed on me, steady and practical. He pushed power into it, trying to brute force the constraint. Purple energy surged and the ground around his boots cracked. I answered with power of my own, matching the output just enough to keep my spatial fold intact. The force ran through me cleanly now that I had all six. It felt like a tool in my hand instead of a storm pressing against my limits. Behind me, someone shouted. Cap. Tony's voice cut through the noise. We've got an opening. Steve's response came in the tone he used when he was managing chaos. Hold your line. Don't crowd him. Simple. No speeches. No extra. Just the next right instruction. I turned my head slightly, keeping my attention on Thanos while still talking. Tony, I said quickly, don't go near his left hand. Yeah, Tony replied, tense and fast. That's kinda the plan. You're the glowing space rock. You do the hand thing. I felt a small grin inside me, the kind that came out when people were being themselves under pressure. It helped. It kept the atmosphere from becoming something heavy. Thanos changed tactics. Time flared from his gauntlet. Green light rippled outward, trying to drag the entire zone into a slowed sequence where he could reposition and break my grip. That kind of wide area time manipulation was exactly what got people killed. They froze. He moved. Then it was done. I brought my own time stone forward and anchored the local flow. Not reversing, not rewinding, not doing anything fancy. Just locking everyone's motion to normal speed in a tight radius around the fight so the battlefield didn't stutter again. The effect was immediate. The ripples met resistance and flattened. Nearby, Drax kept running without suddenly slowing, which was good because he looked like he would have smashed into a rock otherwise. Rocket kept firing without his muzzle flashes turning into stretched lines. Wanda's red energy stayed sharp and present, not smeared out by time distortion. Thanos's eyes narrowed further. He did not waste time being frustrated. He pulled reality next, red light pushing outward, trying to rewrite the constraint around his hand. I answered with reality and mind together, holding my spatial fold in place as a defined rule. His hand motion did not reach a snapping point. Reality could rewrite rules, but it still had to compete with another authority writing a different one. I kept mine specific and narrow. That made it easier to defend. Thanos made a short sound through his nose, not a growl, not anger, just irritation. The battle around us pressed closer, not because people wanted to crowd him, but because battles did that. Lines shifted. Soldiers fell. Others stepped into gaps. I rotated slightly and saw Peter Quill behind a chunk of broken metal, peeking around it with his blasters up. He looked sweaty, frantic, and stubborn, exactly like he did when he was trying to be brave while also being himself. He shouted, "Hey! Big Purple! Over here!" Thanos didn't even glance at him. He was too focused on the fact his gauntlet hand wasn't working. Quill ducked back down anyway, muttering loud enough that I could hear it. "Okay. Cool. Ignore me. That's fine." I held my constraint steady and spoke again, keeping it short. "Steve," I said, "keep people back. If he touches someone, he'll use them." Steve's voice came right back, firm. "Sam, move them left. Clint, stay low. Nobody gets close to his hands." I heard Sam Wilson answer with a quick, "On it," and then wings flared as he moved. Tony shifted position in the air, repulsors adjusting. "If anyone has a plan that doesn't involve dying, now's the time." "Working on it," I replied lightly. Thanos tried a direct approach. He stepped forward hard, closing distance with physical intent, and swung his free hand at me, aiming to grab. He still believed in contact, in control through strength. I moved sideways through space, reappearing a few meters to his right, still keeping the fold around his gauntlet hand intact. He twisted fast for someone his size and swung again. This time I met him with power, not a beam, not a blast meant to kill, just a short, heavy impact to stop his forward momentum. His armor rang. Dust lifted. He slid backward again. He planted his feet and lifted his gauntlet hand, trying once more to force his fingers into the snap. They still wouldn't align. Good. I kept my time anchor steady. No slowdowns. No stutters. I could feel the strain of holding two large-scale controls at once, space constraint and time stabilization, but it was clean strain, manageable, like holding a heavy weight in a comfortable grip. Tony's voice came again, closer now. "Okay, Rock friend, you're doing great, but we still need the glove off him." I flicked my awareness toward him. He was hovering at a safe distance, armor scratched, posture tense. Behind him, Strange was visible for a moment, hands raised, managing something off-screen. Spider-Man swung past in the distance, moving fast and chaotic the way he always did. "We need distraction," I said. "Not a pile-on." "Copy that," Tony replied. Steve shouted, "Thor!" Thor's response was a heavy, annoyed grunt. "I am occupied." That sounded like Thor. Straightforward. No drama. Quill suddenly popped up again, looking around like he was searching for the right moment. He shouted, "Hey! I can do distraction. I'm great at distraction." Rocket yelled back from behind cover, "You're great at getting shot." "I'm still alive." Quill shouted, then ducked again when something exploded nearby. Thanos took advantage of the noise. He flared the Mind Stone again, trying to hit me with a direct mental shove while I was managing everything else. The pressure came sharp and invasive, aiming to disrupt my focus. If my space fold slipped, even briefly, he'd snap. I met his mental force head-on, pushing back cleanly. I did not try to invade him. I did not try to read him. I just blocked and shoved his contact away, like slamming a door. The pushback made him stiffen for a fraction of a second. That fraction mattered. Tony noticed it too. "Cap," Tony said, he just blinked. Steve answered, "Take it." That was enough. No extra. Steve never used extra words when the moment was live. Quill chose that exact moment to be Quill. He sprinted from cover in a straight line that made no tactical sense, shouting something that sounded like, "Okay, okay, okay." He slid across the dirt on his knees like he was in a bad action movie and fired both blasters at Thanos' face. The shots weren't going to hurt Thanos much. They did, however, make him tilt his head and narrow his eyes in annoyance. Quill stood up quickly, breathing hard, and said, "Hey! You like music? You got a favorite?" Thanos swung his free hand at him with casual force. Quill yelped and dodged backward, tripping over rubble. He landed on his back, scrambled, and rolled out of the way just in time. That little chaos did one useful thing: it shifted Thanos's attention and posture, disrupting his stance long enough for someone else to act. Spider-Man! He shot in from above like a red and blue blur, webbing snapping outward. His voice was high and strained, the way it got when he was trying to be brave. "Hi! Excuse me. Sorry. Arms," Peter said rapidly as he fired webbing at Thanos's gauntlet arm. Thanos roared this time, more from annoyance than pain, and tried to tear the webs away. The spatial constraint around his hand made the motion awkward. He could still move. He just couldn't close the fingers into the snap. The webbing added another layer of inconvenience. Tony followed up immediately, blasting at Thanos's elbow joint, not trying to burn through, just trying to force the arm into a different angle. Thor threw Mjolnir across the battlefield in a tight arc that cracked into Thanos's shoulder and bounced away. Thanos staggered half a step. Quill somehow got back up, face grimy, eyes wide, and he lunged toward the gauntlet like he had decided he was the hero of this exact moment. "Okay!" Quill shouted. "Okay, okay, okay!" Rocket yelled, "Don't touch it!" Quill ignored him. He grabbed the gauntlet wrist with both hands and pulled. It should not have worked. Thanos was stronger. The gauntlet was secure. That was the entire problem with this scenario every time. But the combination of factors mattered. The spatial constraint I held made the gauntlet hand's alignment wrong, which forced Thanos to tense in ways he didn't prefer. Spider-Man's webbing locked the arm at an angle that reduced leverage. Tony's blasts kept interrupting muscle control. Thor's hit had shifted his weight. And Quill was reckless in a way that sometimes landed in the exact right crack. The gauntlet's connection loosened. Thanos's eyes widened by a fraction. Quill yanked again, teeth clenched, face red with effort. "Come on!" The gauntlet slid. Thanos tried to clamp down, but he couldn't align his fingers properly, and his wrist angle was wrong. He snarled and reached with his other hand to grab Quill. Spider-Man wrapped Thanos's free arm with webs mid-reach. "Nope. No touching." Quill gave one last hard pull, stumbling backward as the gauntlet came free in his hands. For half a second, he just stared at it, stunned. Then he yelled, voice cracking with excitement, "I got it!" Tony shouted, "Kid, drop it to the rock!" Steve yelled, "Get it out of here!" Thanos reacted instantly, rage finally showing in his posture even if his face stayed controlled. He surged forward, breaking webs with brute force, reaching for the gauntlet. I moved. Space snapped, and I appeared directly in front of Quill. He flinched hard, eyes going wide as he realized a glowing stone entity had just teleported into his face. "Whoa," he said loudly. "Okay, you're close." "Hand it over," I said, cheerful but firm. Quill hesitated for a fraction, then nodded fast. "Yes. Yep. Take it. Please take it." He shoved the gauntlet toward me. I took it. The moment it touched my field, the 6 stones inside it recognized me the way stones recognized stones. The sensation was immediate, like matching frequencies snapping into alignment. My own 6 were stable inside me. The 6 in the gauntlet were active, charged, and still warm from Thanos's use. Thanos lunged, arm outstretched, trying to grab me and the gauntlet together. I shifted backward through space, keeping distance, and anchored time again to prevent him from doing something wide and desperate without the gauntlet. Without the stones, he was still dangerous. He was still strong enough to kill people with his hands. That mattered. Tony hovered nearby, breathing hard over comms. Okay, 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 we have the glove. We have the glove. Do we have a plan for what happens next? Steve's voice was tight. Keep moving. Keep distance. Thor stepped closer, eyes fixed on Thanos, shoulders raised like a storm ready to break. I will end him, Thor said, voice low. I didn't respond to that. I wasn't here to manage their feelings. I was here to stop the worst outcomes. I looked down at the gauntlet. I could feel the 6 stones inside it pulsing. I smiled, genuinely excited. All right, I said quietly, to myself. Then I started to eat them. Not chewing. Not physical. Absorption. I pulled the stones out of the gauntlet's structure one by one, not with force but with authority. Space, mind, reality, power, time, soul, each one lifted free, their glow brightening for a moment as if resisting, then collapsing inward as I absorbed them into myself. The gauntlet went dark and inert in my hold, just metal and design without purpose. As the 6th stone integrated, a deep, clean surge ran through me. It wasn't messy. It wasn't unstable. It was an expansion, controlled and immediate. My energy doubled. The increase wasn't subtle. It spread outward around me in a visible wave, light pushing across the battlefield in a wide radius. Dust lifted. Loose debris rattled and shifted. People nearby staggered slightly as the air pressure changed. Tony's helmet snapped toward me. Okay. That's a lot. Quill blinked fast, staring at me. Did you just eat the universe glove? Rocket shouted from somewhere behind cover, I told you not to touch it. I didn't touch it. Rocket shouted back at himself, then corrected, you know what I mean. Steve held his shield up instinctively, bracing against the wave. When it passed, he lowered it slowly, eyes locked on me, expression controlled but wary. That was Steve. He never panicked, but he never ignored a new threat. Thor stared too, grip tightening on Stormbreaker. He looked ready to swing if I moved wrong. I kept my posture relaxed. I didn't flare aggressively. I didn't target anyone. I let the energy settle into a stable field around me. The wave faded. The air stopped shaking. Thanos stood several meters away, now empty-handed, breathing hard. His eyes tracked me with a sharp focus, his body coiled like he was deciding whether to charge anyway. I felt the seriousness deepen. Not fear. Just awareness. If he rushed them now, he could still kill people. If the Avengers rushed him, they could still die. With the gauntlet gone, this became simpler in one way and more dangerous in another. The stones weren't the problem anymore. Thanos himself was. I hovered slightly higher and looked over the battlefield. The Avengers and their allies were still fighting Thanos' army. Strange was still maintaining a spell. Wanda was still tearing through enemies. Tony was still airborne, scanning, clearly trying to decide whether I was a solution or the next problem. Steve's stance stayed grounded, ready to move either direction. Quill took a cautious step back, hands raised slightly, voice more careful now. So, you're, like, on our side, right? I turned my attention to him and answered simply. I'm not with him. That seemed to help a little. Quill exhaled, shoulders loosening. Tony didn't relax, but he stopped advancing. Steve held position. Thanos spoke, voice low, controlled, with anger held tightly behind it. You took everything. I tilted slightly, like I was considering his statement. Yeah, I said lightly. You were going to use it. His eyes narrowed. He flexed his empty left hand once, like he could still feel the gauntlet there. I shifted my focus back to the battlefield edges, making sure my time anchor still kept wide area effects from getting weird. I held space stable so no accidental tears opened. I kept reality calm so no one's body suddenly turned into something else because of stray interaction. Then I faced Thanos fully again, energy steady, doubled, controlled. He took one slow step forward. I did not move away. Chapter 6, leaving one war behind. Thanos took that slow step forward like he still expected the world to bend around him, even without the gauntlet. I did not let it. I kept my field steady and watched his shoulders, his hands, the way his weight settled. Even without the stones, he was still strong enough to tear through normal people. He was still skilled enough to kill someone important if they got close. I did not feel like letting that happen when I had the ability to stop it cleanly. I lifted my focus and used space with a tight, simple goal. Move him. Do not break anything else. The air near him pinched for a moment. Dust lifted in a thin ring around his boots. His eyes widened by a fraction as he felt the space around him shift. Then he was gone. Not disintegrated. Not crushed. Just relocated. I placed him far enough away that he could not immediately reach the main fight, far enough that the Avengers and their allies could breathe and regroup without him stepping into the middle of them and breaking someone's ribs. I did not send him into a star. I did not send him into empty space. I sent him to a distant stretch of broken ground on the same planet, somewhere he could stand and rage and decide what to do next without being able to grab anyone in the next second. The battlefield around me kept moving. Explosions continued. Soldiers still clashed. But the pressure changed. The center of gravity shifted away from panic and back toward a fight people could actually win through normal effort. Tony's helmet angled toward me again. His voice came quick and breathy. Okay. You just moved him. Yeah, I replied lightly. He was in the way. Steve looked past me toward the direction Thanos had vanished, then back at his own fighters. His tone stayed controlled. Keep the line. Push them back. Don't chase. That sounded like him. No celebration. No big reaction. Just directing the next step. Quill was still staring at me like he was trying to process the last 5 minutes. His hands were half raised in a defensive gesture, then he dropped them slowly. So, he said cautiously, you're definitely not gonna, eat us, right? Rocket shouted from somewhere, we are not snacks. I let my attention flick briefly toward Quill and Rocket, and I kept my tone casual. I'm not interested. Quill nodded quickly. Cool. Cool. Great. Love that for us. Thor's gaze stayed fixed on me longer than the others. His face was tight, jaw set, but he did not lift his weapons toward me. His focus shifted back to the fight like he was forcing himself to stay on task. Wanda's eyes flicked toward me as she tore apart another cluster of enemies with a sharp sweep of her hands. She looked tired and angry and focused, exactly how she looked when she was pushing herself too hard but refusing to stop. She did not speak. She just kept moving. I kept time anchored. I kept space stable. I kept reality calm. I didn't make the battlefield weird. I didn't turn anyone's gun into bubbles. I didn't change gravity. I didn't do anything flashy. I stayed practical. People fought better when the world behaved. The moment the immediate danger felt handled, my mind shifted to the next step automatically. I had what I came for. I had absorbed their stones. I had doubled my energy again. I was stronger. That was useful. Staying here longer was not. It was not that I didn't care about the people still fighting. It was that my presence on this field created a new variable they could not understand or plan around. Steve and Tony were already trying to decide if I was a threat. Keeping me here would keep that tension alive. They would fight worse. So I left. I did not announce it. I did not say goodbye. I opened a controlled break in space and time just behind me, shaped tight so it wouldn't tear through anyone nearby. I slipped through and sealed it instantly, leaving the battlefield noise behind like someone shutting a door. Silence hit me immediately. Deep space again. No shouting. No fire. No metal impacts. Just open emptiness. I let out a small sigh. Not because I was tired. Just because the situation had been loud, and I liked quiet. Then I oriented myself toward the multiverse. I could feel the way realities stacked beside each other now that I held more than a single set. The sensation wasn't confusing anymore. It was structured. Patterns. Frequencies. Weak points where one universe rubbed close enough against another that you could step across without ripping the whole layer. I picked one. I stepped through. The transition was smooth, but the moment I arrived, I recognized the difference. The energy felt heavier here. The rules felt tighter. The ambient magic tasted like it had been used hard, for a long time, by someone who refused to stop. I frowned slightly, then sighed again. Superior universe, I said quietly to myself. It wasn't a compliment. It was the label that fit. I knew this one. Doctor Strange here was not the same man as the one I had quietly taken a time stone from before. This was the Strange who went too far. The Strange who used the time stone again and again. The Strange who absorbed things he should not have absorbed. The Strange who kept going even after it broke everything around him. Strange Supreme. I did not like dealing with him. He was not stupid. He was not easily distracted. He was not going to listen to a cheerful tone and shrug. Still, he had a time stone. And I collected stones. I moved toward the location that matched his signature. It wasn't a normal sanctum. It was a pocket of space shaped by magic and stubbornness, a place where he stayed because the outside world was not really there anymore in the way a normal world was. As I approached, the air thickened. Strange swords noticed me. They did not react like Asgards. Asgards were proud and formal. These were defensive and tense, like someone flinching before the hit. A circular field formed ahead, runes rotating along its edge. A wall of energy rose, dark and glossy, humming with contained force. I stopped and hovered in front of it. Strange, I called, voice steady. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the field peeled open like a door being unlocked from the inside. He stepped out. He looked like him, but not. His hair was streaked. His face carried fatigue that had become permanent. His posture was upright, controlled. His eyes were sharp and tired at the same time. His cloak moved behind him with its own intent, but even it seemed quieter here, like it had learned not to be playful. He held the eye of Agamotto at his chest. Green light pulsed faintly. His voice came calm and low. You are not from here. No, I replied. His gaze tracked me carefully, assessing. You carry the stones. I do, I said, and kept my tone light on purpose. I'm here for your time stone. He didn't react with surprise. He didn't blink hard. He simply narrowed his eyes slightly. You cannot take it, he said evenly. I can, I replied, still calm. The cloak lifted slightly behind him, like it was bracing. Strange's expression tightened. Not anger. Not drama. Just decision. Leave, he said. I didn't argue. I didn't negotiate. I didn't explain multiverse plans or talk about fate. That kind of talk didn't work on him, and it wasted time. I moved. Space folded and I appeared closer, reaching toward the eye. Strange reacted instantly. A ring of orange sparks snapped into existence around his hand, then expanded into a shield that slammed between me and the eye. The impact was quiet but heavy. The barrier held. He followed with a second spell, dark tendrils of energy lashing outward, not aimed to kill, aimed to bind. They wrapped toward me like living ropes. I answered with reality, loosening their structure, turning their grip into something less coherent. The tendrils weakened, but Strange corrected immediately, adding more energy, tightening the weave. He was good. He had practiced this too much. I shifted again, appearing to his side. His cloak snapped toward me like a warning. He rotated with it, bringing up another shield, then extending a spell that tried to pin me in place by anchoring my position to his runes. I used space to slip the anchor, and time to keep my own motion clean. I did not try to attack him with power directly. I didn't want to blow his pocket apart. I wanted the stone. Strange's voice stayed controlled. You are destabilizing this place. I'm being careful, I replied. He flicked his hand and the environment responded. A set of stone pillars rose from nothing, forming a partial cage around me, runes burning along their edges. A second later, the cage shrank, trying to compress my space. I held it open with power, keeping the walls from closing. The pressure increased. Strange leaned into it, face tightening slightly, sweat forming at his temple. He was pushing hard. I smiled faintly, not mocking, just amused that he was still trying to overpower a full set. You're strong, I said. He did not answer. Instead, he changed tactics. The eye flared green. Time tugged at me in a sharp direction, trying to drag me backward into a loop, the kind of loop he used when he trapped Dormammu. He wanted me contained. He wanted a repeating moment where he could study me, adjust, win. I refused. I anchored my own time flow, then pushed outward, breaking the loop before it formed. The air shimmered with green light, then snapped back. Strange's eyes narrowed more. He stepped forward, cloak lifting, hands moving in precise patterns. He began layering spells, one after another, not flashy, just efficient. A mirror-like distortion formed around me, trying to split my position into multiple reflections and trap me in the wrong one. I used mind to identify the real anchor, space to cut to it, and reality to collapse the rest. A swarm of small creatures, shadows shaped like things he had absorbed, surged forward, their mouths open, their movements aggressive and hungry. I used soul to push them away, not destroying them, just forcing a separation that made them recoil like they had hit a boundary they couldn't cross. Strange's expression changed slightly at that. He recognized the soul stone. He would. He had too much experience with unnatural things not to. His voice came quieter. You have no idea what you are doing. I kept my tone even. I know exactly what I'm doing. That was true. I remembered how his story went. I remembered what he became. I remembered how much damage he caused when he refused to stop. I moved again, aiming directly at the eye. Strange threw his shield up, but I didn't hit it. I targeted the eye itself with space, isolating it from the rest of his ward structures. The eye's containment resisted, but I had done this before. I used reality to loosen it, then power to pull. The eye cracked open. Green light spilled outward. Strange's face tightened sharply as he felt it happening. No, he said, voice still controlled but suddenly heavier. I did not slow down. The time stone floated free. Strange grabbed for it with a spell, orange bands snapping toward it to pull it back to him. I cut the bands with space. He tried again with a different spell, darker, more aggressive, a net that would bind the stone to his hand. I used mind to anticipate the structure, reality to rewrite the net's grip into nothing, and soul to anchor the stone to me instead of him. The time stone drifted toward me, green light bright and steady. Strange stepped forward hard, cloak flaring, eyes sharp. He raised both hands, gathering a large, dense spell that made the air shake. I stopped smiling. This was the point where he could break the pocket, and if he broke the pocket badly enough, he could create collateral that reached beyond it. I wasn't going to let him do that just because he was stubborn. I used space to lock his position for half a second, just enough that his hands couldn't complete the pattern. I didn't bind him forever. I didn't freeze him. I simply interrupted. Then I absorbed the time stone. The integration was immediate. It was familiar, but richer. Another universe's time stone carried slightly different tuning. It slid into my structure and doubled that aspect again, clean and stable. The moment it settled, my energy expanded outward, controlled but noticeable. Strange's cloak snapped back like it felt the wave. Strange himself staggered half a step, boots scraping lightly across the ground. His face stayed composed, but I could see the strain in his jaw. I drifted backward, putting distance between us. Strange's voice came low. That stone is not a tool. I kept my tone simple. It is for me. He took a slow breath. His hands lowered slightly. The air around him stayed tense. He didn't chase immediately, which told me he was calculating how to keep his pocket from collapsing without the stone. That was fine. He could keep his problems. I didn't want them. I turned away. Strange's voice followed, sharper now. If you leave with it, you will. I'm leaving, I said, cutting him off without harshness, just firmness. I opened a path and slipped out before he could decide on another spell. The superior universe faded behind me as I stepped through open multiverse space again. My awareness stayed wide, scanning, choosing. Asgard was next. Not the Asgard I came from earlier. This was a different Asgard, in a different universe, with its own space stone secured in its own vault. I could feel it at a distance already, a clean blue signature. I moved toward it at a measured pace, letting the new time stone settle fully. I kept the internal structure stable. I did not want overlapping time effects when I stepped into a place like Asgard again. As I crossed the last stretch, I let myself relax slightly. The tension of fighting Strange Supreme eased. My cheerfulness returned in small pieces, the way it always did when danger faded. I broke into Asgard's airspace and slowed, hovering high above the gold and stone. The city below looked familiar in shape but not identical in detail. The guards' routes were slightly different. The energy wards had different patterns. That was normal. Different universe, different choices, different habits. I angled myself toward the palace and began descending, already planning the vault approach in my head, already rehearsing the exact order of stones I would use to slip through wards without triggering alarms. Chapter 7, Blue Light, No Alarms. I hovered high above Asgard for a few seconds longer than I needed to, letting my attention stretch across the city and the palace grounds. The place looked clean from up here. Gold roofs, stone spires, long bridges, guard routes moving in patterns that were familiar but not identical. Different universe, same design language. Same priorities. I kept my energy tight, tucked in, not flaring. Heimdall was the first real concern. In a lot of versions of Asgard, he could see far too much, and he had a habit of noticing things that didn't belong. He also didn't waste time with confusion. If he saw me, he would act. The palace guards would follow. Then this turns into a situation where someone decides to swing a spear at a floating glowing thing, and I didn't feel like doing that today. So I planned the entry in the most boring way possible. No dramatic portal over the city. No loud arrival. No touching the Bifrost. No giving anyone a clean line of sight long enough to process me. I slid down the side of the palace at an angle that kept me out of the main watch lines. I watched the guard towers as I descended, tracking head turns, tracking patrol timing. The Mind Stone inside me helped with that kind of observation. It didn't make me smarter than I already was, but it made the processing immediate. I could hold more detail at once without it feeling crowded. I reached the palace wall and passed through stone cleanly, phasing into an interior corridor that smelled like polished wood and old metal. Warm light from wall sconces fell across clean floors. Everything was quiet enough that I could hear faint footsteps in other halls. I moved deeper. I didn't bother disguising myself. I didn't need illusions. The goal was to not be seen at all, not to be mistaken for something acceptable. If someone saw a floating, glowing stone shape sliding through a palace hallway, they were going to react no matter what. Better to avoid the moment entirely. The first set of wards brushed against me as I approached the inner palace layers. Asgardian wards were different than sorcerer wards. Strange defenses were pattern-heavy, built on symbols and specific triggers. Odin's wards were older and less theatrical. They were tied to power that sat in the bones of the place. They didn't need to flash or hum to be effective. They just existed, and they pushed back. I slowed and tested them with a light touch of reality. They resisted in a steady, patient way. Not aggressive. Not alarmed. Like a locked door that didn't care who was trying to open it. I respected that. Then I went around it. Space was the key here, but using space the wrong way in a palace full of magic was a quick method for creating a visible ripple that someone like Heimdall would notice. So I used time first. Not to rewind. Not to freeze. Just to measure the rhythm of the ward's pulse. Every defense system had a cadence. It expanded and contracted, even if the change was subtle. This one did, too. The pulse wasn't obvious to a normal person, but I wasn't normal anymore. I watched it for 3 cycles, then slipped through at the smallest point of its expansion, when its boundaries were slightly thinner. I passed, and the ward didn't react. I felt a small flash of satisfaction, the kind that showed up as a tiny lift in my internal mood. Quiet wins were still wins. I moved on. 2 corridors later, I heard voices ahead. Not guards on patrol. Servants, by the pace and tone. Calm conversation, light footsteps. I angled myself upward and passed through the ceiling into an empty storage space above the hall, then drifted along beams until I reached another wall and moved through it into a quieter passage. I kept doing that. Slow, careful, never forcing. Asgard's inner palace was built like a layered shell. Each layer assumed the previous layer had already filtered out threats. That meant most corridors were quiet, but it also meant the few gates between layers were serious. Eventually, I reached the vault approach. The air changed here. Cooler. Heavier. The light was dimmer. The stonework was thicker and less decorated. This part of the palace wasn't designed to impress anyone. It was designed to hold things that should not be easily reached. I paused in a shadowed corner and listened. 2 guards stood at the far end near a reinforced doorway, spears in hand, posture straight. They looked like Asgardians from the period I expected, armor clean, helmets shaped with minimal ornament, faces calm and alert. They weren't talking. They were doing their job. I didn't want to hurt them. I didn't want to knock them out. I didn't want them panicking and running to alert someone important. I also didn't want to manipulate their minds more than necessary. I could, easily, but I kept it as a last resort. I watched the timing of their breathing and the way their weight shifted. They weren't statues. Even disciplined people relaxed by a fraction when nothing happened for long enough. One guard glanced toward the hall behind him briefly, then forward again. The other rolled his shoulders subtly and reset his grip. I drifted forward, hugging the wall, staying high eye that their normal eyeline wouldn't catch me. When I reached the doorway itself, I slid into the seam between door and frame and passed through without touching the metal. Inside was another threshold. This one was magical. I felt it immediately. A tight lattice of force that recognized identity, authority, and intent. The kind of thing you couldn't just phase through without creating a reaction. I narrowed my focus. This was the point where a mistake would matter. I used mind first, not to dominate anything, but to read the structure of the lattice. It wasn't reading my thoughts like a person would. It was reading my signature, the way a lock reads the shape of a key. My signature was wrong for it. I wasn't Asgardian. I wasn't a recognized visitor. I also wasn't a normal intruder. I adjusted reality lightly, but not in a way that tried to break the lock. I shifted my own presence so it matched a neutral category the lattice would accept, inert artifact being transported internally. That was a risk. If it interpreted me as a dangerous artifact, it might react harder. I tuned it carefully, making my profile quiet and contained, like an object that belonged in the vault rather than an object trying to reach it. Then I used space to step through the lattice at a point where its detection grid was thinnest. For a moment, there was resistance, like pushing through thick air. Then it gave, and I was inside. No alarms. No flare. No sudden surge of attention. I let out a small breath I didn't need, purely out of habit, and drifted forward. The vault itself was exactly what it should be, long corridors lined with locked displays, heavy doors set into stone, golden light reflecting off polished surfaces. The air was clean and cool. The silence was heavy but not hostile. And the objects were everywhere. Some I recognized from the films. Some looked familiar but slightly altered, as if this universe's history had shifted which trophies ended up here. The Infinity Gauntlet display was present in one chamber, but it was different from the one I remembered from my first universe's Asgard vault. The shape wasn't identical. The finish looked newer. I didn't stop. I didn't touch anything. I was here for one thing. The space stone. I could feel it at a distance, a steady blue signature tucked behind several layers of containment. It was in the vault, but not sitting openly. This Odin or whoever ruled here took it seriously. I followed the pull. As I drifted down another corridor, I heard a faint sound behind me. A low hum that didn't match the vault's normal ambient quiet. I stopped and held position near the ceiling. The sound grew clearer. Footsteps. Slow. Heavy. Controlled. That was not a servant. That was not a normal guard on patrol. I shifted slightly and angled my awareness outward, searching for the source without turning this into a big energy scan that might ping someone. A figure moved into view at the far end of the corridor. It was Thor. Not the older, heavier Thor I'd seen on that battlefield. This Thor looked closer to the version from earlier in the timeline, the one who still carried himself like the palace was his home and not a place he returned to. His armor was bright. His hair was neat. Mjolnir hung at his side. He walked with purpose, but he wasn't sprinting. That meant he wasn't responding to a blaring alarm. He was here for a reason that existed before I arrived. That was good. It also meant I had to be careful because Thor was exactly the kind of person who would notice something odd if he happened to look up at the wrong moment. He paused near one of the displays, glancing at something inside it with mild impatience. Of course, he muttered, voice annoyed but not angry. He would keep it here. That told me something immediately. He was looking for something. Probably Loki-related. Maybe Odin had sent him. Maybe he was trying to prove a point. Thor at this stage didn't hide his intent well. He wasn't stupid, but he was direct. He turned and kept walking. I stayed still until he passed beneath me and moved on, then I slid into the wall and rerouted through a side passage to avoid crossing his line again. It took longer than I liked, but it was safer. Eventually the blue pole grew stronger, and I reached a sealed chamber door with markings that were very clear, authorized entry only, reinforced by magic that felt like Odin's personal signature. I hovered close, studying it. This wasn't a door I could just phase through. The metal was layered with enchantments that reacted to intrusion by warping space locally, which meant phasing could dump me into a pocket trap if I got sloppy. Odin's stuff was built to punish arrogance. I smiled faintly, amused, and felt a tiny flicker of excitement again. I liked problems that had clean solutions. I used mind to map the ward geometry. I used time to examine how it refreshed and reset. I watched it for a full minute, letting the pattern become familiar. Then I used reality to create a brief condition the door accepted. The ward recognized a passing inspection routine by a specific class of Asgardian Vault Keeper. I didn't invent a Vault Keeper. I didn't create a person. I created a short-lived permission state in the ward itself, matching a state it already had in its library. This was basically convincing the lock it was currently in a scheduled open window it had been designed to allow. The ward flickered once. The door's internal mechanisms shifted. I slipped through quickly, using space to cross the threshold before the ward refreshed. Inside, the chamber was smaller and much more secure. The air felt even colder. The light was dim blue, coming from a single object in the center of the room. The Tesseract. This universe's space stone container looked almost identical, a blue cube set inside a containment frame. The frame was anchored to the floor and connected to the room's wards. I hovered in front of it and paused. I had absorbed a space stone before. I knew what it felt like. I also knew that each universe's stones were slightly different in tuning. That mattered when you already carried multiple copies. I wasn't worried about failure, but I was careful about integration. I preferred my power stable, not volatile. I braced my internal structure with mind, setting up clean channels and separation layers. I anchored my personal time flows so there would be no stutter. I held space steady so the room wouldn't ripple. Then I reached. The Tesseract reacted immediately, blue light brightening. The containment frame tightened, trying to clamp down. The wards surged, sensing something wrong. I didn't force it with raw power. I didn't blast the frame apart. That would be loud and messy, and Asgard did not tolerate loud and messy near its most dangerous objects. Instead I used reality to loosen the containment's assumption that the Tesseract was a single solid object. I separated the concept of container from the concept of stone. The space stone's signature flared as it recognized the separation. Then I pulled, smoothly, and the stone detached from the cube, appearing as pure blue energy for an instant before condensing into its recognizable core form. The Tesseract itself went inert, losing its glow. The frame tried to clamp on empty air. I absorbed the space stone. The integration was immediate and clean. A second space stone slid into my structure like a puzzle piece locking into place, and my internal control systems adjusted automatically. I felt a sharp surge of capacity, then stabilization. The energy increase was clear, but not chaotic. It added on top of what I already had, doubling that aspect again. I let out a quiet sound that was basically a happy exhale, the way I used to when something worked the first time. Then I got serious again. The wards in the room were reacting now. Not full alarm yet, but they noticed the absence. They were trying to decide if the object had been moved by authorized means or stolen. They would decide stolen soon if I didn't leave cleanly. I used reality to restore the ward state to what it expected during a routine transfer, temporary absence, pending relocation documentation. I didn't have documentation, obviously, but the ward didn't know what paperwork was. It knew states. It accepted the state. The tension eased slightly. I slipped back through the door using space and sealed it behind me by letting the ward refresh into its locked phase naturally. I didn't try to force it shut. I let it do its job. Now I needed to exit without meeting Thor again and without crossing any eyes. I drifted through the side corridors, staying in the walls and ceilings whenever possible. The vault felt more active now. Not alarmed, but aware. I sensed small shifts, guards repositioning, a faint increase in patrol movement. Someone had noticed something odd, even if they hadn't identified it. As I passed one display hall, I heard Thor's voice again, closer this time, sharp with impatience. "Father," he said, tone contained but irritated. "He cannot be allowed to." Another voice answered him, quieter, older, heavy with authority. "Odin." I froze in place inside the stone of a wall, holding completely still. My cheerfulness dimmed into careful focus. Odin at full strength could be a problem even with all the stones. Not because he could overpower me directly, but because he could make leaving complicated, and complicated got people hurt. I didn't hear Odin's full reply clearly, but I heard enough to know he was calm, dismissive in the way he got when he thought Thor was overreacting. Thor spoke again, more frustrated. "You cannot simply lock every problem away and pretend it is finished." That sounded exactly like him at this stage. The bluntness. The frustration. The sense of responsibility mixed with ego. Odin's answer came low. "Do not question me in my own vault." Thor fell silent for a second, then said, quieter, "As you command." I stayed still until their footsteps moved away from my corridor, then continued. I exited the vault the same way I entered, slipping through the identity lattice with my signature still tuned to inert artifact transfer. The outer doorway guard pair remained at their post, still unaware. I passed into palace corridors, then through walls, then out of the palace entirely. When I cleared the palace perimeter, I rose into the sky slowly and held position high above the city again. No alarm sirens. No mass mobilization. No Heimdall beam striking toward me. I let a small grin return, satisfied. Another space stone collected. I oriented toward open space and prepared to leave this universe before anyone had time to connect missing light in the vault to anything real. Chapter 8, 3 stops, no waiting. I didn't linger above Asgard any longer than necessary. The longer I stayed inside a universe after taking something important, the more chances there were for someone competent to connect the missing piece to an intrusion. Asgardians were proud, but they weren't careless. Odin was the worst kind of problem if he decided to treat something as a serious threat instead of an annoyance. So I left cleanly. Space folded, and the gold city dropped away behind me. I crossed into the dark between worlds, then aligned myself toward Midgard. Earth. I arrived above the planet's atmosphere and slowed, letting my awareness spread across signals and energy patterns. This version of Earth was close enough in structure that the big landmarks and movements felt familiar. Communications bounced in ways I recognized. Military networks behaved the same. The density of life was the same. And the Mind Stone was here. It wasn't inside me yet in this universe. I already carried many Mind Stones from other universes, but each one was its own tuning, and collecting was about completeness, not close enough. The signature pulled me toward New York. I dropped through clouds and into the city at a height that kept me out of casual sightlines, then moved between buildings and into the region where Stark's presence sat like a bright, loud signal. Even without scanning minds, I could feel the weight of his tech. It was everywhere near him. Stark Tower rose above the city like it owned the skyline. It usually did. I didn't go in through a window this time. I didn't feel like repeating my first theft in my original universe. I entered from below, through reinforced foundations, phasing up into the building's interior where the structural materials thickened and the security layers got more serious. The first defenses didn't register me. Sensors searched for heat, mass, motion, electromagnetic signatures in the shapes they understood. I wasn't shaped like something their rules expected. I moved along an elevator shaft quietly, past cables and maintenance panels, then through a wall and into a corridor that smelled like clean metal and expensive polish. Voices echoed faintly down the hall. Tony Stark was talking to someone, and the tone told me who before I even got close. Because if you can't keep it in a box, then you don't have it, Tony said, voice sharp but controlled, the way it got when he was trying to sound casual while being annoyed. You have a museum. Great. Put it in a museum. Steve Rogers replied, calm but firm. It's not a trophy, Tony. I didn't say trophy, Tony snapped back quickly. I said box. They were in the tower together. That narrowed the period precisely. Post-Battle of New York, still early in their working relationship. Steve still had patience, but not unlimited. Tony still talked like every disagreement was a personal insult even when it wasn't. I drifted closer, careful, and angled my awareness toward the lab nearby. The Mind Stone's signature was strong here. The scepter. It was still intact, still glowing faintly, still sitting in a containment rig while people who thought they were in control pretended they understood what it was. I slid through a closed door into a lab space lit by white panels and screens. Tools were laid out neatly. A few monitors showed data that meant nothing, because the stone didn't care about their graphs. The scepter rested on a platform behind a transparent barrier. Tony stood on the far side of the room, arms crossed, looking toward the rig with a face that said he didn't trust it, didn't like it, and didn't want anyone else telling him what to do with it. Steve was nearby, hands loose at his sides, posture relaxed but ready. That was Steve's default. Ready without acting like it. Bruce Banner was there too, slightly behind them, eyes on the readouts, expression cautious and tired. This was him before he learned how to settle into being part of the team. He still looked like he expected to be asked to leave. Tony noticed something first. His head turned slightly, eyes narrowing as he looked toward a point in the air near the barrier. That's not good, Tony said quietly. Steve's attention snapped up immediately. What? Bruce looked up too, pushing his glasses up his nose without thinking. What is it? I didn't respond yet. I held still, hovering close to the ceiling, and watched Tony step forward. His voice sharpened. Friday, do we have? A woman's voice answered from the room system, smooth and calm. I'm not detecting any intruder, boss. Tony's mouth tightened. Yeah, well, I'm detecting something with my eyes. Steve shifted, stepping slightly to put himself between Tony and the scepter rig without making it obvious. He did that kind of thing automatically. He didn't posture. He just moved. Show yourself, Steve said, voice steady. I floated down into clear view, stopping a few meters from them. I didn't flare. I didn't threaten. I just existed openly. Bruce's eyes widened. Tony stared like he was trying to decide if this was a hallucination or a new kind of problem he could punch. Steve kept his shield arm slightly angled, not raised fully. Tony spoke first, because Tony always spoke first. Okay, he said, voice tight. That's a floating, whatever you are. Are you with Loki? No, I replied simply. Steve's eyes stayed on me. Then what are you? I kept it short. Here for the stone. Tony's expression shifted into immediate anger. Absolutely not. Bruce's voice came careful and quiet. Tony. Tony cut him off. No. We are not doing cosmic robbery today. Steve didn't raise his voice. He just said, if you want it, you'll have to go through us. I stayed cheerful. Not fake cheerful. Just my normal setting when things were interesting. I don't want to fight you. Tony made a short, disbelieving sound. Then leave. I'm taking it, I said plainly. Steve's posture tightened. Don't. I didn't waste time pushing their emotions. I didn't need to. I used space to slide past the barrier without touching it, then reached toward the scepter. Tony lunged forward instinctively, repulsors beginning to raise, but space let me stay out of his grasp. Steve moved faster than Tony expected, crossing the room with a straight line and swinging his shield toward me. I shifted 2 meters sideways. The shield hit empty air and slammed into the floor with a hard clang. Bruce flinched and stepped back. Tony's voice snapped, "Okay, that's it." I didn't let him fire. Mind reached out, not to control him deeply, just to blunt the impulse to shoot first. The effect was brief, like a moment of hesitation. Tony's repulsor stayed half-raised, but the shot didn't come. He glared at me harder. "Did you just?" "No," I said, because I didn't feel like explaining it. "Hold still." Steve tried again, this time not swinging, just moving to block. He was good at that. He didn't overcommit. He adjusted. I used space again and moved around him, keeping my approach smooth and clean. My fingers didn't exist, but my intent did. The scepter's core glowed brighter as I made contact. Tony shouted, "Don't touch it." I absorbed the Mind Stone. The glow collapsed inward. The scepter went dead and heavy, its core empty. Tony froze in place, staring at it like he couldn't accept that something had just removed the most dangerous object in the room without breaking a sweat. Steve's jaw tightened. He didn't panic. He turned his head slightly, checking Tony and Bruce, then looked back to me. Bruce whispered, almost to himself, "It's gone." Tony's voice came sharp and angry. "Give it back." I shook my head slightly. "No." Steve took a slow breath. "If you're not here to hurt anyone, then why take it at all?" I kept it simple. "Because it gets people killed." Tony barked a humorless laugh. "We're the Avengers. That's the job." I didn't argue. I didn't explain Thanos. I didn't explain multiverse collecting. I didn't explain anything personal. I backed away through the air, keeping my tone light. "You'll be fine." Tony looked like he wanted to throw something. Steve looked like he wanted to chase. Bruce looked like he wanted to disappear into a corner. I didn't give them a chance to do any of that. Space folded, and I was gone from the lab in a clean blink. I reappeared above the Atlantic, high enough that no one would see me, and let the new Mind Stone settle into my structure. The tuning clicked into place. My internal control became smoother, sharper, more layered. I felt pleased. Then I moved on. The Reality Stone was next, and this universe's version of it wasn't going to sit politely in a box forever. The collector was always an accident waiting to happen. I angled toward No here. The jump was instant from my perspective, but I still arrived outside the mining perimeter and slowed, watching patterns like I always did. Ships moved along routes. Workers clustered in groups. Security drones drifted. I slipped inside without being noticed, moving through corridors lined with relics and cages. The smell here was always the same: metal, chemicals, and something faintly organic that reminded me this place was a dead celestial's head. People lived inside it anyway. That was normal for this part of space. The collector's gallery was active this time. More staff. More movement. That suggested his paranoia level was higher in this universe, or he had recently acquired something that made him nervous. Either way, the stone pull led me forward. I entered the main chamber and saw him immediately. Tanelier Tavan stood near a containment pedestal, hands clasped behind his back, speaking in an irritated tone to two guards who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. "I told you," the collector said, voice clipped, "no one touches the unit without my permission. If it breaks, I will have you peeled." One guard nodded quickly. The other swallowed, face tight. The containment pedestal glowed faintly red. The Reality Stone's housing was intact, but the field around it was strained. The collector's tech was always flashy and rarely robust. He turned, noticing me in the air. "What?" he said sharply, like he couldn't decide if he was angry or offended, "is that?" "I'm here for the stone," I replied. His eyes widened slightly. He lifted one hand. "No, no, no. Absolutely not. Do you know what that is?" "Yes," I said. He took a step backward, voice rising slightly. "Do you know what it cost me?" "I don't care," I replied, still calm. His guards lifted weapons uncertainly. I didn't attack them. I didn't even look at them. I focused on the Reality Stone, reached, and absorbed it cleanly. The red light surged outward in a brief pulse, shaking the chamber. A few glass cases rattled. A staff member yelped and stumbled. The pedestal shattered into fragments that clattered to the floor. Then the red energy collapsed inward, gone. The collector stared at the empty space where his prize had been, mouth slightly open. His face went pale with anger. "You," he started. I drifted backward, keeping my tone casual. "It was going to explode eventually." "It was stable," he snapped. "It wasn't." He just liked saying things were stable. I didn't argue. I left. Outside No Here Again, I stabilized the new Reality Stone tuning. My internal structure adjusted, becoming more comfortable handling conflicting physical rules. I felt a small, quiet satisfaction. 2 stops down. One more in this sequence. Morag. The Power Stone was still in its temple at this point, untouched by Peter Quill. If I took it now, it removed a whole chain of messy events. I liked clean. I jumped to Morag's orbit and slowed, watching the planet's wet surface flash with lightning. No ships. No movement. Just rain and stone. I descended through clouds and found the temple quickly. I entered through broken stone, moving into the interior chamber where the stone's signature sat heavy and aggressive even through containment. The orb was there, humming faintly. I approached slowly. The Power Stone always felt like it wanted to fight, even when no one was provoking it. It was simple that way. I reached out and absorbed it. Purple energy surged hard, the strongest outward pulse of the 3. The temple walls vibrated. Fine dust shook loose from ceiling cracks. The water in the shallow pools outside rippled violently for a moment. Then the energy collapsed inward. Stable. Contained. Mine. I hovered in the quiet interior and let all 3 new stones settle fully: mind, reality, power. My awareness expanded again, not in a dramatic way, just in capacity. More control. More options. More efficiency. I felt cheerful, and it showed in the way my attention moved lightly across the chamber, the way I didn't rush out like I was scared. Then I left Morag and returned to open space, stopping far enough away that nothing nearby would be affected by accidental spill. I checked my internal inventory without thinking of it as inventory, because it was just me now. Multiple sets. Multiple tunings. Growing. And I still had a simple process: find, take, absorb, stabilize, leave. I aligned my attention outward again, already feeling where the next missing stones were in this universe. Soul was always the most annoying because of Vormir's rules. Time was always guarded by someone stubborn. Space was already taken from Asgard. Mind was now integrated. Reality and power were integrated. The remaining steps were clear. Chapter 9, Warmer first, then fast. Deep space gave me the quiet I liked, and I used it properly. I held still and let the 3 new stones I had just integrated in this universe settle into their places. Mind, reality, power. Each one had its own feel, its own tuning. I had enough sets now that if I got lazy, I could make a mess by letting similar functions overlap. I didn't get lazy. I layered control the same way every time. Mind set the structure. Space set the boundaries. Time kept the flow steady. Reality stayed contained until needed. Power stayed contained until needed. Soul stayed quiet, like it preferred. Once everything was stable, I rotated in place and looked outward with my awareness rather than eyes. 2 stones remained in this universe, soul and time. Vormer and the Time Stone's keeper. Vormer was annoying, but it was also predictable. The rule never changed. The problem was always the price. I moved. Space folded, and I arrived above Vormer's grey sky. Cold wind touched my energy field in a way that felt like a warning more than weather. I descended slowly, because the place was designed to make people feel watched, and I preferred to control the pace when something tried to set a mood around me. The cliff and the stairs were there. The stone platform waited at the top. Everything was quiet except the wind. He was there too. Red Skull stepped forward like he had been standing in the same spot for years without shifting his feet, because he probably had. His expression was composed. His posture was formal. His voice carried that same controlled tone he used on everyone who came here, regardless of whether they were a titan or 2 exhausted humans. "Welcome," he said evenly. "Stonekeeper. Guide to the Soul Stone." I hovered near the edge of the platform and faced him directly. I didn't flare my light. I didn't push my energy into him. I didn't want a fight. I wanted an exchange. "I'm here for the stone," I said. His gaze lingered on me for an extra beat, like he couldn't decide how to categorize what he was seeing. He settled on his usual script anyway. "You know the price," he replied. "I do," I said. He stepped closer, boots scraping lightly. "In order to take the stone, you must lose that which you love. A soul for a soul." I stayed quiet for a moment, not because I was unsure, but because I was checking myself. The rule wasn't flexible. It wasn't a lock you could pick. It was a condition. I had no companion. I had brought no one. I wasn't going to drag some random person here just to throw them. I wasn't going to do that to anyone. That kind of choice was ugly, and it wouldn't solve anything long term. If I became the kind of thing that treated lives like tokens, then I would eventually do something worse than Thanos, just with better organization. I didn't like that idea. Red Skull's eyes stayed on me, patient in the way a bound jailer was patient. "You have come alone," he said. "Yes," I replied. "Then you cannot pay," he said, voice still level. "You will leave without the stone." I rotated slightly, glancing over the cliff edge. The drop was the same as always, open air, nothing visible below, a fall that was more symbolic than physical. I looked back at him. "The rule is love," I said. "It is," he answered. "I can pay with something I love," I said, still calm. Red Skull did not change expression much, but his eyes sharpened. "You cannot offer a concept. It must be lost. It must be real." "It will be real," I said. I wasn't trying to impress him. I wasn't trying to be clever. I was just being direct. I reached inward. The soul stone inside me from other universes had already taught me how the soul felt when it was treated like an object instead of a word. It wasn't mystical in the way people on Earth like to talk about. It was structure and identity and attachment. It was the part of a being that stayed coherent across time and change. I could touch my own. I could not split off a new person. I could not make a second mind like mine. I wasn't going to. But I could choose a piece of myself that counted as that which I love, because it actually was something I loved. The easiest answer would have been power. I liked power. But liking wasn't love. Not for me. Not in the way Vormer meant. So I picked something that was simple and honest. My joy. Not all emotion. Not my ability to care. Not my seriousness when people I cared about were in danger. Just the clean, easy cheerfulness I carried everywhere, the part that made me treat chaos like it was interesting instead of crushing. The part that made it easier to move through impossible situations without getting stiff and bitter. I actually liked that part of me. I didn't want to lose it. That made it valid. I held it in my focus until it felt like something I could grasp, then I pulled. The separation was sharp. Not painful, exactly, but it made the space inside me feel suddenly quieter in a way I noticed immediately. I didn't go empty. I didn't go cold. But the bright, casual lift that was usually always there dimmed hard. I frowned slightly, annoyed by how immediate it felt. Red Skull watched, still, eyes fixed on the fragment of my soul structure I held outside my main coherence. "What are you doing?" he asked, the first time his script cracked. "Paying," I replied. He stared at it with a kind of rigid attention, like he was afraid to blink and miss whether it counted. I pushed the fragment outward over the cliff edge. It hovered there for a fraction because I was still holding it, and I felt the pull of keeping it. I didn't want to let it go. That confirmed, again, that it was real. Then I released it. It fell. No scream. No body. Just the clean drop of something that was mine disappearing into the condition Vormer demanded. The air shifted. I felt the place respond the same way it did when Clint or Thanos paid the price. A change in the rules. A confirmation. Red Skull's posture stiffened slightly. His voice lowered a fraction. "You have, given of yourself," he said. "Yes," I replied, and I kept my tone steady even though the lack of that easy cheerfulness made my words feel flatter than I liked. The soul stone appeared behind me in a steady orange glow. I turned and absorbed it immediately, not hesitating, not celebrating. The integration was deep and clean. I felt the soul stone settle into the structure of everything else, and it stabilized me in a way that made the loss of my joy feel less sharp, like the system of me had new reinforcement. I turned back to Red Skull. His face was still composed, but the attention in his eyes was different now. He didn't look impressed. He looked unsettled, like the rules had accepted something he hadn't expected. "You may leave," he said. "I'm leaving," I replied. I rose into the sky and left Vormer behind. In orbit, I paused to assess myself. My emotional range was still there. I could still care. I could still feel satisfaction when something worked. I could still feel irritation when something wasted my time. But the easy brightness that made me grin at problems was dulled, like someone had turned down the volume. It bothered me. Not enough to stop. Enough to notice. I pressed on. The next stop was Earth again, but for the time stone. I did not want to fight someone like Strange if he existed here yet, and I did not want to cause collateral in New York. The simplest route was to go to the Keeper before Strange. The Ancient One. I shifted through space and arrived above Kathmandu. The city sat quiet beneath me, normal human life moving in tight streets and crowded rooftops. I dropped lower and located Kamartaj by its wards and the way it folded a